June 5th, 2007. A sunny afternoon in the quiet town of Kerang, Victoria. Just another day in the Australian countryside. Until everything changed in the blink of an eye. A speeding passenger train, a fully loaded semi-truck, a level crossing with no boom gates, and no second chances. When the two collided, the wreckage was catastrophic. 11 lives were lost. Dozens more were left injured, shocked, and scarred for life. But what really happened that day? Could this disaster have been prevented? Stay with us as we uncover the full truth behind one of Australia's worst rail disasters since 1977, the Kerang train crash. Kerang is a town in southeast Australia, with a population of 3,893 people, as recorded in 2016. It is located in the state of Victoria, about 123 kilometers, or 76.5 miles, north of Bendigo. The town also sits around 50 kilometers, or 31 miles, southeast of Swan Hill. Kerang sits along the Pyongyil railway line, a 140-mile track that runs between Yungara and Bendigo. This line is single-tracked and not powered by electricity. It was first opened in 1926, built to carry both passengers and freight. The track uses Australian broad gauge. This means the rails are spaced 1,600 millimeters apart, that's about 5.3 feet, wider than the standard rail spacing, which is 1,435 millimeters, that's about 4.7 feet. The train involved in the crash was number 8042, a passenger service run by V-Line, traveling from Swan Hill to Melbourne. It was made up of 3 passenger cars, each with 4 axles, and was pulled by a diesel locomotive known as V-Line N460. This type of engine, called the N-Class, was first introduced in 1985. It runs on diesel and was built in 2 versions, one for standard gauge and one for broad gauge tracks. Every locomotive in this series is named after an Australian city. N460 was named City of Castlemaine. The first car behind the locomotive was a first-class car, labeled ACN21. Behind it was BRN20, a second-class car that included a buffet area. The last car, BN19, was also second-class but had no buffet section. The train could carry up to 221 passengers, but at the time of the crash, it had only 34 people on board, 6 in the first car, 21 in the middle buffet car, and 7 in the rear car. There were also 2 conductors and 1 driver on board. On the day of the accident, a man named Mr. Scholl, aged 49, was driving a semi-truck from Victoria to South Australia. His route took him along the Murray Valley Highway. The truck he was driving was a 1999 Kenworth K104 Aerodyne, a cab-over design, meaning the cab sits directly above the engine, with no long hood in front. Attached to the truck was a Kruger refrigerated curtain trailer. It had a refrigeration unit installed on the front wall. At the time of the crash, the trailer was loaded with 14.5 metric tons of medium-density fiberboard, a type of wood board made by compressing wood fibers. There were also 2 more tons of what the report called miscellaneous freight. On June 5th, 2007, at around 1:30 p.m., Mr. Scholl was driving north through Kerang as part of a regular transport route between Wangaratta in Victoria and Adelaide in South Australia. It was his first day back at work after a 4-week vacation. By 1:30 p.m., Mr. Scholl was driving along the Murray Valley Highway, a 2-lane paved road running through a flat, open landscape. About 3.7 miles, or 5.9 kilometers, north of Kerang, the highway crosses the Pyongyil railway line at an angle of around 40 degrees. At the time of the accident, the crossing had warning signage, bells, and red flashing lights, but no barriers or boom gates. At exactly 1:33 and 46 seconds in the afternoon, the V-Line train from Swan Hill to Melbourne activated the level crossings warning system. The bells began to ring, and red lights started flashing as the train approached from the northwest at a speed of 56.5 miles per hour. But Mr. Scholl didn't react in time. He only applied the brakes when he was already very close to the tracks. Although the truck began to slow down, it was carrying a heavy load. The weight made it impossible to stop quickly enough. The locomotive and the first passenger car made it safely through the crossing, but at 1:34 and 11 seconds, just 25 seconds after the warnings began, the front of Mr. Scholl's truck slammed into the side of the second train car at an angle of 32 degrees. The truck was still moving at over 40 miles per hour. The impact forces the rear of the second train car off the tracks, tearing open its sidewall. The crash also damages the front right-hand side of the third car. The coupler, the connection between the two cars, breaks apart, causing the last car to separate from the rest of the train and derail. The truck is heavily damaged. The force of the crash nearly tears the driver's cab, which can tilt forward for engine access, away from the truck's frame. The trailer doesn't stop. It pushes the damaged truck aside and crashes into the train as well, breaking apart from the impact. Mr. Scholl survives the collision, but he suffers serious injuries. On board the train, 22 people are injured. Tragically, 11 passengers lose their lives as parts of the train are torn open and several seats are ripped from the floor. Just 8 seconds after the crash, the first call to emergency services was made. In the next 3 minutes, 5 more calls followed, including one from the train control center, who had been alerted by the train's driver. By 1:50 p.m., the first emergency crews arrived at the scene. 5 of the most seriously injured passengers were flown by helicopter to Melbourne. The rest of the injured survivors were taken by ambulance to the nearby town of Kerang. From the very beginning of the rescue operation, it was clear the outcome could have been even worse. At the time of the crash, the train was only lightly filled. The second car, BRN-20, was the most crowded. But even then it carried just 21 passengers, less than 1/3 of its full capacity. Tragically, BRN-20 was also the car that took the direct hit from the truck. It suffered the most severe damage. More than half of its right-hand wall was torn open. Several rows of seats were crushed backward or completely ripped from the train. Of the 11 people who lost their lives, 10 had been sitting in BRN-20. 9 of them were seated on the right-hand side, exactly where the truck struck the train. Side impacts are a known weak point in passenger train design, and unfortunately, there's no easy way to fix it. When a train is hit from the front or back, the impact is absorbed by buffers at the ends of the cars. There are also special energy-absorbing structures in the entry areas, where no passengers sit. In many trains, the frames are built to line up in height. That way, during a front or rear collision, the strong parts of the train take the force, not the passenger areas. But with a side impact, there just isn't much room to add the same kind of protection. Modern passenger cars are built like a rib cage, with vertical support beams and a thin outer metal shell. Behind that are layers of insulation, electrical wiring, and interior panels. It's enough for comfort and weight savings, but not enough to stop a high-speed collision from tearing through the side. The trailer of the truck tore into the side of BRN-20 by cutting through the metal skin of the train car. As the trailer kept moving forward with momentum, it carved a wider and wider gash into the car's body. By the time of impact, the truck itself had already broken apart. Its front section absorbed much of the initial force as it was pushed aside. But the trailer was different. Its frame was stiff, had no crumple zone, and sat slightly higher than the train's floor. That allowed it to ride up and mount the frame of the rail car, driving deep into the passenger area before finally coming to a stop. The investigation into the Kerang accident quickly pointed to the truck, not the train, as the cause of the crash. Investigators focused on the actions of the truck driver, Mr. Scholl. But the process was harder than expected, because Mr. Scholl chose not to speak with the investigation team. They had to rely on a brief statement he gave to police and the physical evidence left at the scene. One key detail: skid marks on the road showed the truck's brakes had been fully applied about 49 meters, or 161 feet, before the crossing. These marks came from the trailer, not the truck itself. Unlike the truck, the trailer didn't have an anti-lock braking system. Without that system, the wheels locked up and slid, leaving long marks on the road. The marks also veered slightly to the left, about 8 degrees, which explained why the wreckage ended up on the left side of the road. Investigators noticed something important. The right side of the truck was far more damaged than the left. This led them to believe that Mr. Scholl, realizing he couldn't stop in time, may have tried to steer left, into the brushland beside the road. That side of the crossing had more open space because of the angle where the road met the railway. As a result, the truck struck the second train car, BRN-20, with its front right corner. The impact crushed a large part of the cab before the truck was pushed away from the train. This allowed the trailer, still moving forward, to slam into the side of the train car and tear into its body. Scuff marks and broken windows on the front right of BRN-20 confirmed this sequence, showing where the cab hit and bounced off just before the trailer broke through further down the car. The force of the impact was so great that it knocked BRN-20 off the tracks and out of line with the third car, BN-19. The connection between the two cars, called the coupler, broke apart. This allowed the trailer to hit the front corner of BN-19 directly. The damage was devastating. BN-19's forward right-hand side was crushed, and most of the space where passengers would have sat in the first 5 meters, or about 16 feet, was completely destroyed. A deep gash, roughly 2.5 meters, or 8 feet, long, showed the path the trailer took as it finally tore away from the train. This theory was supported by a key piece of evidence. The refrigeration unit's compressor from the trailer was later found inside BN-19, wedged in a footwell partway down the car. To better understand what happened, investigators created a computer animation of the crash. This helped to visualize how the events may have unfolded. One detail stood out: the highway curves slightly to the right as it approaches the crossing. This curve may have briefly hidden the flashing warning lights from the driver's view, especially from inside the truck's cab. At around 360 meters, or 1,181 feet, from the crossing, the windshield frame could have blocked the lights for a few moments. Meanwhile, the train itself was hidden behind a small patch of trees. However, the report made it clear: if the driver had leaned forward just slightly, the warning lights would have come back into view. The report explained that as the truck came out of the curve before the crossing, the warning lights became clearly visible again. This happened about 9 seconds before the truck would reach the tracks. As the truck followed the curve, the warning lights stayed in view. Then, at just 106 meters, or 348 feet, from the crossing, the road straightened out. At that moment, everything was visible: the train, the flashing lights, and even cars waiting on the far side of the tracks. The truck was still moving at about 100 kilometers per hour, or 62 miles per hour, covering over 27 meters, or 91 feet, every second. Mr. Scholl began braking only 2 seconds after coming out of the curve. That's a typical driver's reaction time, between 2 and 2.5 seconds. But that short delay meant he lost precious distance before even starting to slow down. By then, it was already too late to stop the truck in time. At first glance, the situation might seem straightforward. You might think Mr. Scholl was simply distracted and hit the brakes too late. He wasn't speeding. His truck was electronically limited to 100 kilometers per hour, or 62 miles per hour. So, it would be easy to assume he just wasn't paying close enough attention to the warning lights or the crossing ahead. But as the official report points out, it wasn't that simple. According to his employer, Mr. Scholl had been driving for just 3 hours when the crash happened. He left at 10:30 in the morning after reporting for duty at 9. This was well within the legal 5-hour driving window before a mandatory break was required in Victoria. So, fatigue likely wasn't to blame. And there was no sign that he was distracted by a mobile phone either. On June 14th, 2007, just days after the accident, investigators recreated the conditions leading up to the crash. They found that just before the curve in the road, the truck was heading directly into the sun. Sunlight reflected off the road, creating a strong glare. At the same time, the train was approaching the crossing from the right, but it was in the shade. That made it even harder to see from a distance. From the reenactment, investigators reached an important conclusion. Mr. Scholl likely couldn't see the train or the flashing warning lights until he had already come through the curve, and by then it was too late to stop. To avoid the crash, he would have needed to slow down before the curve, just in case a train was coming. But here's the missing piece of the puzzle. Mr. Scholl almost always crossed these tracks without seeing a train, because he was usually running on time. Mr. Scholl's regular route usually began at 10 a.m., and by 1 p.m., he'd be passing over the Kerang level crossing with no train in sight. But on this particular day, things didn't go as planned. A delay during loading set him back by about 30 minutes. Now, it's unclear whether he had ever seen the crossing with the warning lights flashing before. But what's clear is that he didn't expect it that day. Crossing those tracks had become a routine, always empty, always clear. So, slowing down just in case wasn't something he likely considered. In fact, in his statement to police, he said he only noticed the flashing lights after wondering why the cars ahead, on the other side of the tracks, had stopped. In the end, the investigation pointed to something deeper, something known as inattentional blindness. It's a condition where the eyes may see something, but the brain doesn't register it. This can happen when a person isn't fully focused, or when the brain filters out things it doesn't expect to see, and that's exactly what may have happened to Mr. Scholl. Investigators spoke with other truck drivers, and many admitted something surprising: that on long, repetitive routes, they often feel like they're not fully aware of what's around them. Some described driving for miles without remembering the details of the road. It's not carelessness. It's the human brain trying to manage too much at once, and when you combine fatigue, routine, and a sudden unexpected danger, it can lead to disaster. The final report reached a sobering conclusion. It's very likely that Mr. Scholl fell victim to inattentional blindness. He simply didn't see, or didn't register, the flashing warning lights in time. By the time he noticed the danger, he was already too close to stop. In a desperate attempt, he tried to steer the truck off the road, hoping to avoid the train by turning into the open field beside the tracks. But with 16.5 tons of cargo behind him, the truck couldn't turn fast enough. The impact was inevitable. The train's driver, moving along at nearly full speed, never stood a chance of reacting. The collision unfolded in seconds. Mr. Scholl's legal journey took another turn in December 2007, when he appeared in court. He faced 11 charges of causing death by negligent driving and 8 charges of causing injury. The trial began in May 2009, but despite the overwhelming tragedy, Mr. Scholl was found not guilty on all charges. The verdict shocked many, but the legal battles didn't end there. Several victims' families and survivors vowed to seek justice through civil action. In 2011, one of the train conductors publicly revealed that Mr. Scholl had settled out of court, paying an undisclosed amount to resolve the matter. The Kerang train crash remains a tragic chapter in Australia's history, not just because of the lives lost, but because of the unresolved questions that linger to this day. We leave it to you, the viewer, to share your thoughts and continue this conversation. Share your thoughts below.